So, thank you, baby sunshine. All right. Looks like Facebook is up and running. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about how to work through a fear trigger. And so this is going to be something that is really helpful. These are tools and practices that I use myself, and I use these on a frequent basis. So just because you've done inner work doesn't mean that there aren't going to be things or times where thoughts get into your head that cause you to go down this path of fear. And if you've listened to me before, you'll know that I talk about fear is false evidence appearing real. And so when we think of that, when we get in this state of fear, it doesn't feel like it's not real. It feels very freaking real. And if you've been through past trauma like I have, then you are a little bit more prone to this kind of stuff. Being aware of what you've been through and how to work through this is actually going to be something really, really helpful. Sorry, cat hair. So, if this is your first time joining me, my name is Tina. I'm a happiness coach and I help business owners move through feelings of anxiety, depression, frustration, anger, whether that is personal or professional. And I do this by sharing my own personal experience, strength, and hope in order for you to start to apply this stuff to your life today and also to be aware of what somebody on your team might be going through. And oftentimes, I will share business experiences. So in this particular case, I'm going to share a little bit of both, and we're going to tie these two things together so that you can understand how, even if you haven't personally been through trauma, understanding what somebody who has been through trauma and whether or not they've actually done any work and how to possibly help them, because this does affect your business, whether it's something that you've been through or not. Okay, because I can promise you there's probably somebody on your team that has been through some sort of trauma, and a lot of times they either haven't dealt with it or unaware of it, and if they're in denial, just like if there's a problem in your business and you're not aware of it and it keeps going on and it still functions in that old way without getting fixed, then there's going to be bigger problems, right? The longer you leave a problem unattended, the worse it will get, the more damage that occurs, and the harder it is to fix. So, learning to start to do this inner emotional work is crucial at being able to live a happier life, have a happier business, have happier relationships, have happier self esteem, self worth, all of that kind of stuff. And you might be thinking, yeah, but Tina, I'm pretty good. I'm like, yeah, you're a business owner. Don't lie. We know on the surface we all seem good, but in the background, there's a million things that we're having to deal with that can cause most normal people to crumble. And so, and I know that you're strong. I get it. I get it. Fully get it. But being able to work through this, being able to be aware of this and do this at a faster rate, it can take it from being something that keeps you stuck for months or years to just a few hours of just being able to go through this process and transmute that energy, that fear, and shift it over. Thanks, Cindy, for being able to tap the screen and share the live. I appreciate you so much. So, I'm going to start out before we get into the 7 things that you can do to work through a fear trigger. There we are. So let me adjust this. Here we go. So that you guys can see the screen a little bit. My head's in the way. Still getting all used to the camera angles and the blackboard and everything, or the whiteboard. Okay, so back in 2018, I was working in corporate transportation and logistics, and we had a major project that was on the go. It was long hours. It was a huge project, multiple $1 million that were on the line. And having to do negotiations with companies that were going to be very aggressive, hostile, and against the change that we were implementing. And so having to do this stuff, it was a big project, and my boss and I were working together on this. At the time, I was a manager, and so this was also an opportunity. I was also dealing with some higher level CEOs, VPs, all that kind of stuff. And so I was really excited about being able to work on this project, and I was eager to go above and beyond. And so that is kind of what I defaulted to. I was coming in at 8 a.m. and I was staying extra late because there was a lot of stuff that went on through the day, lots of meetings, lots of conversations needing to be had, lots of project planning and stuff like that. And then afterwards, after 5 o'clock, that's when I would do some of the analysis and the tracking and stuff like that when everybody else went home and it was quiet and I was able to do that kind of stuff. And sometimes my boss and I were working on this stuff together, putting everything in place. And so 8 a.m. till 3, uh, there were a couple of nights it was 3 a.m. when I left, and then back in 8 a.m. the next day. And this went on for about 6 weeks. And so there were some challenges that came up. Long story short, at the end of this 6 weeks, I ended up having a breakdown in the middle of the office. And I was horrified by this. And it was something that I actually couldn't stop. And it got to the point where I ended up sobbing uncontrollably in the middle of the office. My vision blurred. Both of my arms went numb. I could not physically stand up, and all I wanted to do was run to the bathroom and hide. And everybody came running over to me thinking, oh my God, what's going on with Tina? Because normally all they heard in the office was my laughter. And to hear me wail in absolute grief. And I was so triggered in this. Now, since then, like everybody could say, oh, it was all the pressure from the job and all that kind of stuff. No. Yes, there was a lot of pressure. Yes, there was a lot of things. But in doing the inner work, what I've come to realize now, what got me in that situation wasn't the stuff that people around me were doing. It was what was going on in my own head. And what was going on in my own head when I had that breakdown is I had been exhausted. I was exhausted and I was like, it doesn't matter how hard I work, it's still not enough. And that kept playing over and over and over in my head, and I just snapped and I couldn't take it. And that's when that whole panic attack thing happened. And I didn't realize that's what was going on. But that was also a catalyst for a huge change for me of when I started to get back on my healing journey because I had stopped it for a very long period of time, from 2002 till 2018, right? So I had just been, you know, going through the motions, everything was fine, and this was a catalyst. And I remember walking out of that building after I got all calmed down. Everybody helped me out, and I washed my face, went to the washroom, washed my face, took a few deep breaths, went back to my desk, finished everything up, and they're like, Tina, just like go home. And I'm like, no, I got a couple of things to wrap up. And I'm like, I'm still going to leave early. I'll leave at 6 o'clock today instead of, you know, midnight. And so I did that. But as I was walking out of the building that day, I remember at first, during that whole episode, I felt so much shame that this stuff had happened. And I was like, I absolutely could not control it in the moment. And I felt uh, ashamed, embarrassed. I was like, man, I thought I could take it. I thought I was stronger than this. And I remember vowing as I was walking out the building that I don't know why this happened or what the purpose is behind it, but I am going to figure out the reason for it, and I am going to be stronger. So I made a decision back then after that of how I was going to operate from there. And that triggered a whole catalyst of events of different things that I started back on this healing journey. And it has been a heck of a roller coaster ride, let me tell you that. There have been some really high highs and there's been some really low lows. So, that being said, having gone through this, it's really allowed me to dust off the original tools that I learned back when I first started therapy, when I was healing and recovering from the effects of sexual abuse and growing up in an alcoholic abusive home and all of those kind of things. Um, so the second wave didn't hit until 2018. Well, 2018 was the initial trigger, and then there's been a few other things. And it's kind of been like whitewater rafting. I don't know if you guys have been whitewater rafting. It's like you'll paddle along in the calmer part of the river until you hit the rapids. And so you're working pretty hard. And then you would think that when you hit the rapids, there's enough speed and everything to that you don't really have to paddle. No, when you hit those rapids, you actually have to paddle harder just to keep the control over the boat. And so, yeah, that was something, that's kind of what it's been like, right? So there's the work that you do paddling along just to kind of get going. And then when things hit, that's when you actually have to paddle even harder. So even though you've done this healing work, this inner work, you will come up with things that will rub against old wounds. Okay, and those things will cause you to maybe react in a way that is similar to the way that you reacted in the past. But now the difference is because you've done that initial work, you now know the tools, you know how to implement the strategies and how to work through that at a rapid pace, right? And so because I've been doing a lot of this kind of stuff, I can shift that, those emotions from feeling that fear and feeling that uncertainty and doubt and that self-criticism and beating up on myself. And instead of going down that road and staying on that path, I kind of recognize the signs. I'm like, oh, okay, I know what's going on here. And we're going to start going through the 7 things that I do when you recognize that you have been triggered by fear and how to start working through those kind of things. So the first thing, you're going to feel the emotion. So you're going to, and you might be like, well, duh, Tina, it's like I have no choice. Well, you might feel frustrated. You might feel angry. You might feel panicked. You might cry. You might have an upset stomach. You might feel some tension in your shoulders, in your neck, in your head. You might have headaches. You're going to actually feel and pay attention to what is going on in your body, right? Um, so that is first step, right? So you're going to feel the emotion and you're going to allow that to wash over you, okay? You're not going to try to stop it. You're not going to try to change it. The next thing is you're going to, can you guys see that on TikTok? A little bit better. No, this way. Okay. There we go. So TikTok can see a little bit better now. Okay. So you're going to feel the emotions and then you're going to observe that your self-talk. What are the thoughts that are going through your head? Are you thinking things like, I'm never going to make it, I never do anything right, I am this is terrible, I'm going to be stuck here forever, whatever it is that's going on through your mind, of paying attention to those thoughts and observing them. And if you can, give them a voice, write them down to get them out onto a piece of paper, right? So now I can do this because I've done this so many times. I can do this without actually having to write it down, and I can do this just through mental thought process. But in the beginning, I would write this stuff out ad nauseum. And the more no holds barred you can do this, the better it is for you. Okay. So you're going to want to write this stuff out. You're going to observe that self talk and write it down, even if it doesn't make sense. Even if you're like, well, I don't actually believe that. Don't try to censor yourself because it's not what is going on is it's not really you, the adult version of you. It is that child version of us that is triggered, that has that fear response. And what it has gone on is the event that is happening today has put some pressure on an old wound. So 20% is pain that is happening from today. And as adults, if that was the very first time we had ever experienced it, it would be much easier for us to move through. It wouldn't trigger us. We'd be like, well, fuck, this sucks. It's a pain in the ass, but you figure things out and you do it. When you are triggered and you feel these emotions and they're overwhelming, then that is 20% is going on from what is happening today. 80% is an old wound. So observing those thoughts, observing that negative self talk that is going on in your mind, whatever those the voices in your head are saying to you, that's what you actually have to pay attention to. But pay attention to it from the perspective of that is a child, right? So they're maybe don't make a whole lot of logical sense. They're over emotional, just like you wouldn't expect a 3-year old to be completely rational, right? Or whatever age the wound happened at. It's the same thing, and it is a fear response. It is false evidence appearing real, and we have to pay attention to those thoughts because that is going to give us a significant amount of information as to where that original wound happened from. And being able to tie those together is key at being able to solve some of this stuff. Okay, the next thing that I would check in with is halt. I've talked about this a few times, but I go back to this quite a bit. So, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or sick. If you're any of those five, then I strongly recommend not paying attention too much. You don't have to do a whole lot of deep work around this stuff. Just fix that. It's like, okay, am I hungry? When's the last time I ate? Oh, okay, it's been a few hours, or I need to actually eat my dinner. Okay, so I'm gonna go do that first, right? Okay, I've eaten now. Do I still feel upset? Am I still angry? Okay, maybe I need to journal that stuff out. Am I feeling lonely? Do I need to connect with a loved one, a friend? Do I need to connect with myself? Right, whatever it is. Am I tired? Do I just need to like maybe get a little bit more sleep? How was my sleep the night before? Did I get a good sleep? Did I wake up feeling rested? More than likely, if you're triggered by fear, then I can probably assume that the answer is no. And then if you're not feeling well, if you're either in physical pain or if you're starting to feel like you're coming down with something or you're just getting over something or you're just not feeling your best self, then cutting yourself some slack, realizing that you're going to be a little bit more susceptible to outside stimulus and you might react a little bit more negatively than you normally would. And so when I understand halt and I go through that, most of the time it's not a big deal and I can let a lot of that stuff go. Right? Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ground. So grounding, there's a couple of different ways that I do this, depending on the severity of how much I'm triggered into a fear response. So if it is a real huge panic attack, I will do the five senses grounding. And that is looking at five things that I can see, touching five things and naming what those are. listening for five different sounds in the environment, and naming those. Um, sight, sight, taste, touch, sight, sound, right? Um, so all five senses, you're going to go through all of those. Taste, touch, sight, sound, smell. There we go. There we go. So all five senses. You're going to go through all of those and name as many as that you can. So maybe taste and smell are a little bit more challenging, but you can. They take a little bit more effort. So maybe it's okay. Well, I'll taste five things. I'm going to taste my tea. I'm going to taste the water. I can taste the lip balm that I'm wearing, right? So it's going through those. And the purpose of that is to bring us back to this present moment. Because when we're in that fear state, we're either anxious about something that we think is going to happen in the future and we're afraid of that. Or we're worried about something that has happened in the past that's going to cause a problem in our present or in the future. So, being able to ground ourselves by tapping into our five senses brings us back to the present moment. The next thing I will do is breathing. So, box breathing is a good one where you take a breath in for 8 seconds, hold it for 8 seconds, let it out slowly for 8 seconds, hold for 8 seconds, and then do that again. Do a couple of cycles of that. Um, and it will calm you down so that you can think more clearly, brings you back to the present moment, brings more oxygen to your brain, helps calm the vagus nerve, and does all that kind of stuff. Another technique that I use is I will take a long, deep breath in as long as I can, as full as I can, to the maximum capacity of how much I can breathe in. And then I hold that breath for as long as I possibly can. And then I will slowly let it out as long as I possibly can. And it is all a matter of using these techniques to control my breathing, to get me grounded back in my body, back in the present moment, and showing myself that I have control over my own breath. Okay. One of the problems that happens when we get in a state of fear is our breathing gets very, very shallow. Our body physically tenses up, and we get very narrow vision. We can only see like very narrow. So, being able to bring ourselves back into the present moment, calming ourselves down, controlling our breath, slowing it down as much as possible, allows us to relax, open up, and it expands our vision. Now we can see a little bit more clearly. Okay? So the next thing that I will do, and you might be like, well, Tina, I just calmed myself down. Now you're telling me to assume the worst? What the hell? This doesn't make any sense. You're crazy. What are you talking about? Hear me out. So, when we have those negative self talk, those thoughts that are going through our head of all of these worst case scenarios that possibly can happen, that's usually what triggers the fear. And so when those kind of things happen, um, I will, once I've got myself calmed down and I've gone through these steps first, and I'm usually calmer, so now I've got a little bit more logic that I can operate with. And so I think to myself, okay, let's assume whatever these worst things are that happened, let's assume they were true. Maybe I'm like, oh, everybody hates me. Okay, let's assume that's true. Now what? Well, what do you mean? So now you got to start thinking through that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, we're going to drill down and we're going to start asking ourselves why, why. We're going to drill down. And one of the things that's going to happen, so it's like, okay, well, I think my boss hates me. Okay, so why is that a problem? Well, I could, if they hate me, then I could lose my job. Well, why is that a problem? Well, then I won't have any income. Okay, So you just kind of keep going through it, and it's like, well, does that, well, that would be a problem. Well, does that mean, so one of the two things is going to happen. One, you're going to either drill down these whys and you'll be like, well, it's actually not a big deal. I don't really give a shit what that person thinks or blah, 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 whatever it is, right? And you'll realize that, A, that that is not actually a problem, and then you can actually let that go. Or you will determine that, yes, that is an actual problem that would be really bad, right? That if that kind of thing happened. Okay, so now that we have a real problem and it's no longer false evidence appearing real, we're not afraid anymore. We have a problem that needs solving. So now we can work towards actually solving that problem rather than having it, because the fear comes from uncertainty, lack of clarity, lack of understanding. Once we actually define what the actual problem is, now we can start working towards solutions. It's like, okay, well, let's assume your boss does hate you and he is out to get you and they do want to fire you and that they're setting you up to fail and all of this kind of stuff. Like you go through this whole gamut, right? And you're like, okay, so let's assume they succeed and you lose your job, you have everything's gone wrong. Now what? Are you dead? No. Okay. So you've lost your job, you don't have a source of income. What do you do next? Well, I would start calling people I know to see if anybody's hiring. I would start redoing my resume. I would start applying for jobs. I would start doing this, that, or the other thing. Or, you know, I'd be like, you know what, screw it. This is the time that I'm going to actually start a business that I've always wanted to start. Whatever it is that you can start now solving that actual problem rather than having it as undefined fear that is running through your body, right? So this is where assuming the worst is important. And I think I kind of jumped ahead because there is a little bit of a step in between. Okay, so positive conversation. So when we're going through and we're assuming the worst, it is going through and understanding what is that process of what is going on. So I will start to have a conversation with myself from the perspective of as if I was talking to a child, right? Of first of all, asking it's like, what's wrong? Why are you afraid? What's going on? And so understanding what are those things that it's like, okay, well, if I had to explain this to somebody else, what would I tell them is wrong? And it's like, okay, now I also have to cultivate a positive self-talk. So we know that negative self-talk can run rampant, and this is where it causes the fear. But we actually have to practice and exercise that positive self-talk model. And so when I say, okay, well, I would say, well, this thing happened, as if I was explaining it to somebody else. Okay, so now I will give myself some positive acknowledgement. Wow, that sounds really tough, right? Just like I would as if I was talking to a child or a friend or a loved one that they're going through a tough time and I want to support them, right? So it's shifting that perspective to first of all, you got to believe them that what they're going through isn't just made up, right? So there's nothing worse than when you are going through a tough time and then somebody invalidates that, right? And says, oh, just suck it up, cupcake, which is a lot of what I grew up with. And that was the milder form. That was the nice stuff. We won't talk about the other stuff. We'll be here all night. So positive acknowledgement of the experience that I went through, of the feelings that I am feeling because of the challenges that I was experiencing, real or imagined, doesn't matter. Just like a child, they might get really upset thinking that there's a monster in their closet, and there's no monster. But you can't just freak out at them and tell them to stop being afraid and give them something to be afraid of, although very, very typical for what I grew up in my generation, right? I, you know, if you're gonna cry, I'll give you something to cry about was a famous saying in the 80s. So positive acknowledgement of the emotions that you're feeling, of what you've actually been going through, and then so you'll think of that one thing and then exhaust that. And if it helps writing this stuff out, again, I can do this stuff in my head because I spent so many years going through and I'd physically write it all down so that I could ex- um, see that in front of me. And now I can see it more logically, right? But when it's in your head, it's just kind of ruminating around there. So if writing it down helps you do that, if you have done this enough times, then you're probably like me where you can do it in your head. So I will have this positive self talk. I will give myself affirmation and I will say, wow, okay, I can understand why you feel that way. And then I will say, okay, so what else is bothering you, right? So what else upset you today? What else is going on? And I just kind of keep drilling down to those kind of things, and giving myself positive affirmation as I go through what it is that was bothering me, of understanding, not from the point of, oh, poor you've been through such a tough time, you don't have to worry about those meanies. No, no, it's not about that. It's a point of validating the experience, but also in shifting to get to ourselves to get to a point where we're actually looking at solving the problem, right? If there is a problem to be solved. So that is where we have to determine this kind of stuff of understanding, is this a real problem or is this something, it's like, no, this isn't even a problem. I thought it was a problem, but it's not really a problem. And so we're going to have to go through that stuff and understand why we're feeling that way, giving ourselves that support that we need. And this can be a challenge if you've never received that kind of support before, if you've never seen an example of it, if you've never experienced that positive reinforcement when you are going through challenging times. If you are always heavily criticized, maybe you learn to cover it up, maybe you learn to hide it, maybe you learn to just ignore it and pretend it didn't exist. Whatever that situation is, being able to be in a situation where you're actually being supportive, the first few times it's actually going to feel painful for you. Just kind of like somebody who's gone through hypothermia, if uh, just went and put them in hot water, they would be screaming in agony because that would be extremely painful because they were in such cold temperatures before. So it's kind of like that. You have to do this a bit gradually. The first few times it's going to bring up pain because what often happens is it will bring up the pain of all the times that those needs were not properly met. So when you first start getting those needs met properly, that your feelings are validated properly, it's going to bring up some pain from the past. And doing that with a safe person, being able to talk that through, somebody who understands this process and understands how to help you through that is an important key. So if you're doing that with a therapist or if you're looking for a coach, we can possibly talk. Okay? And then the whole goal is, once you've gotten down, you've determined whether or not this is a real problem or not, then this is where we get to work through the shit. This is where we're going to start going through. There we are. We're going to start going through the process of, like the example that I gave of, so the example of my boss is out to get me, he hates my guts, blah, 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 right? So it can feel that way. But maybe as you start going through why you feel that way, why you think that, you might discover that that's not the case. Maybe it's you're overreacting. Maybe it is, oh, you misunderstood something. Maybe you took something personal that they were dealing with, and you thought it was about you, and you find out that it wasn't, that you find out, oh, that they were just stressed because of something else, but you took that on for yourself. Again, that's another trauma response. So you can find out that maybe it wasn't even a real problem and you've cleared the air there. Or maybe you find out, damn, this is actually a real problem. It is real. It is true, and they are trying to, he is out to get me, kind of thing, right? So if that's the case, then now we have a real problem to solve. And now we have steps that we can start breaking down, we can start working with that. When we start doing those kind of things and we have some sort of formulated action plan, then we understand, okay, should that happen, then these are the action steps that I would take in order to solve that problem. Because now we're dealing with a real tangible problem, and we now have clarity, we have understanding, we are able to put some sort of plan into place of how we would respond. And when we have that in place, it gives us that sense of security, that sense of knowing, and that comes from ourselves. And a lot of times we didn't have this if you grew up in a traumatic environment, that sense of that somebody is going to take care of things, somebody is going to be able to deal with those problems. And whether or not you had that support or not, we all still have to go through this process of being able to understand this for ourselves and know that we are the ones that no matter what comes at us, no matter what difficulties, what challenges we face, that we will be able to figure out the problem. We will be able to take some action steps. Now, are we going to be very pretty with it? Are we going to do it gracefully? Are we going to mess things up? That's a whole different story, right? But as long as we have breath in our body and we are still able to continue learning and growing, then this is all part of the process. This is all part of the healing journey, and this is all part of the life experience. And being able to work through this stuff and be able to understand where this is coming from, determining whether or not this is fear, false evidence appearing real, or is this a true, actual problem that we have certain action steps to take? And it removes the fear when we understand, okay, at least, at the very least, we know what our next step is. We maybe don't have to figure out all 150 or 1,000 steps that are needed in order to solve the problem, but we should at least be able to understand, what is the next thing that I'm going to do? What is the next thing? And if you can get a couple of those things built up, then you have some sort of action plan that you can take. If you can't figure that out, then at least know, what do I need to do tomorrow? What do I need to do today? What do I need to do in the next hour? What do I need to do in the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is? And that's how we boil it down and know that those are the very next action steps. And sometimes it's when we take those steps, that is when we start moving through the fog and we're able to get the clarity that we need. And then we can see the other steps that we're going to need. Or we might be able to at least move to a better vantage point where we can kind of see, okay, this way that I was trying to solve the problem isn't the exact right way that I need to do, but now I've moved far enough along that I can see that there's this new path that I wasn't aware of had I not taken those action steps. So we still keep pushing ourselves to move forward, to be able to understand the emotions behind things so that we can work through the fear, work through the shit, and be able to um, understand what's going on and know that we are our own champions. We are our own best friends and our own advocates because we've done the inner work. We understand the process. We understand the tools. We know how to use those tools to help us move through when we have those fear triggers, those fear reactions to something. And so that, guys, is the training for today. So I hope you guys found this helpful. If you joined partway through and you want to catch up on the earlier part of the training, then go to my YouTube channel, Coach Tina B 125. Click on the subscribe button so that you get notified when I upload the new video. And just to keep you apprised of things, I am a little bit behind. I do have to catch up on my videos and uploading them to YouTube. So if you are wanting to watch this, go to Facebook, search for Tina Balmer. You can find me there, and at least go through my feed, and you can at least see the live replays that are recorded there. So you can have that, and hopefully you will check me out, and you will see the training videos and check that out on YouTube. Coach Tina B 125. And I will see you again tomorrow, guys. Have a great night. Bye.